Well, greetings everybody. So I'm recording this in the early days of the corona outbreak, so maybe reuse this video semesters down the road and you'll now know that we've all survived the ensuing zombie apocalypse that we're now been facing. So anyway, today we're going to talk about this first lesson is on pointer fundamentals in C. So this is one of these concepts that is quite notorious for confusing folks that are programming with limited experience. So students that are getting into programming, they encounter this for the first time. It tends to be the concept that tends to throw people for a loop. But I want to break it down into a fairly simple analogy. And I think if you kind of spend some time thinking through this analogy and then seeing how it relates to memory and from a programming perspective, it's really not so bad. So let's just take this one step at a time. Okay, so let's think of this example here when we're looking at basically a letter. Okay, so let's imagine we have a letter, and we have this letter is physically located at this post office in Albany, New York. Okay, so we've got this post office. It resides at a physical location. Okay. And this letter is going to get mailed to an address, right? This address on the letter is not where the letter currently physically resides. Okay, so in this case, we've got this post office in Albany, New York. The letter is at that post office, and it's pointing to the address where it needs to get delivered. Okay, the address in this case, in this analogy, is pointing to North Pole, Alaska. Okay, so this analogy is extremely similar to what we're doing with this concept of pointers in programming. Is we have some location in computer memory, we have something in computer memory in which we are pointing to another location in computer memory. All right, so let's break this down now and look at it a little bit more detailed in an example with pointers a little bit more directly. So in this case, what we have here, all right, let's take that analogy and kind of pull it apart a bit and look how it relates to when we're actually trying to implement something. So this here on the right-hand side, okay, that would be this, we have a variable called PTR for our pointer variable. And this pointer resides at a physical location. And this physical location is a memory address. Okay, and this memory address is listed here as 2047. Okay, that's like the post office location. Right, that's where the memory address where this currently is. Okay, and that pointer contains an address that is literally pointing to another location, a location where it's not currently located. Okay, this is like the letter having an address pointing towards that North Pole, Alaska address. Okay, that is the concept of pointers in a nutshell. Okay, so if you get that, right, you're understanding some of the fundamentals, and then it's more of an understanding of the syntax and how to actually apply it to solve certain problems. Okay, extremely important concept, extremely important concept. A couple things let me point out here as we kind of get into this. First of all, it's important to note that the physical addresses, okay, 1001 and 2047 in this case, they are locations that you do not physically control when those get assigned. Okay, it's actually the computer's operating system that decides, says, hey, these are the addresses you can store this information. Okay, so that's kind of an important thing to note. All right, and let's go into some of the syntax here, and we'll explain this this concept a little bit further. Okay. So the first thing related to syntax is just being able to declare pointers. Okay, so we want to say, hey, I've got a pointer. I want to indicate that this variable is of that type, and let's look at some examples of how to do this here. Okay, here we see 3 examples of pointers being declared. We have an integer pointer, a floating pointer, and a character pointer. Right? Notice the asterisk in this case when you're declaring a pointer, right, is indicating that this is a pointer that points to an integer or floating point variable or a character. Okay, so if we look at data types, Notice that var here is of type int for integer. And that the pointer int star, right, is indicating that it contains an address that points to an integer, right? So that if you follow the address that's contained within that pointer, you're going to be able to get an integer data type. Okay, so that's an important thing to note, right? And that's why we have pointers that have these different types. That we have integer pointers, floating point pointers, character pointers. Any data type you have, okay, you can have a pointer of that data type. So that tells us that if we follow the address, that, like in this case, we follow the address that's contained in the variable pointer, that if we go to that address, we would get a data type of type integer. Okay. So this example here is showing us how to actually declare a pointer. Okay. Where first line is declaring an integer, second line is declaring an integer pointer. And one thing to kind of point out here is this asterisk here, okay, could be written there. Right? Another way to do it is we could also write this in the following manner. Notice that the space is after the asterisk. So you can say int star space pointer, or whatever variable name you want to give it. Okay. So I actually think that this method here is a little bit less confusing because it really is properly indicating that int star, it's an integer pointer data type, that is the data type. Okay. Either way works. Okay, the syntax is valid regardless. Okay. So we've looked at this syntax of declaring pointers. Okay, of declaring pointers. Now let's look at the syntax of kind of going a little bit further, which is something called a reference operator or a reference operation. Okay, the key thing with the reference operation is this ampersand symbol, okay, before the variable name. This indicates that we're getting the address of that variable, okay, the address in memory where that variable lives. Okay, that's what the ampersand indicates. So let's look at some examples of this. Okay. Expanding that example we were just looking at before, if I said ampersand var, I'm going to get that memory address 1001. Okay. If I said ampersand ptr, ampersand pointer, I'm going to get that address 2047. Okay. That allows me to indicate I want the address in memory where this variable is located. Okay. I can set pointers equal to the address. So in one of the previous examples that we were looking at, if I just had the first two lines there, int var, int pointer, int star pointer, I'm not actually making that connection. I'm not actually having that arrow connect this here, this pointer, to the actual var variable. The line, that third line shown below, that makes the connection. That's saying take pointer, the pointer variable, and set the value of that equal to the address of var. Okay, that makes the connection. That's a kind of equivalent of, we go back to our first analogy of going to that letter that's at the post office and actually being able, and like putting the proper address where you want the letter to point to. Okay. All right. We're getting the fundamentals down. We're getting pretty close to have covered the syntax here, and we'll have follow-up lessons where we look at how to apply these things to solve certain problems. Okay. But we've got one other thing that we need to look at first before we kind of wrap this up. And that's we want to look at the dereference operation. The dereference operation. Now, there's one key thing that is very confusing about this, because the dereference operator, notice that also uses this asterisk symbol. That is very confusing, because if you recall, we also use the asterisk symbol to declare a pointer. So that here the context matters a lot. Okay, the context is very important. if we are using the asterisk when we are declaring a pointer data type, okay, the asterisk means just that. For instance, int star and some variable name, okay. In this case, used in a declaration of a data type, that star means that this is an integer pointer. Okay, when it's not used as part of a declaration, it means something else. Okay, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. And this is what we call the dereference operator. What it literally does is it says, go to the address that the pointer points to and give me the value at that address. It's better to understand that using a visual representation. So let's look at this here. Okay, let's go back to our original example. Okay. And here, if we want to say, okay, what does it mean if we get this value here? Notice the dereference operator with the asterisk. Okay. If we say, hey, what's the value of star dereference PTR? Okay. Well, that's going to be 50, because how we determine that is we're going to say, all right, we're at variable PTR. The dereference operator says, hey, go to the address that it points to, and then give me the value at that address. Okay, so that's what that example means. Okay, so let's wrap this up with a way of kind of practicing a couple key things. Right? Let's look at this exercise here, and I'll read it to you, and then we'll draw it out. So this exercise says assume variable int count equals 7. So let's draw that. Let's say we've got a variable. Okay, we're going to have a variable count. Okay, and the value of that is going to be 7. Oops, let me not write that down there. The value is 7, and the data type of that is an integer. So I'm going to write int. Okay, and it says it's stored at memory address 66. So the address here, so we're going to have this address and the value. Okay. Now remember, the address, you don't have control over that. That's going to get assigned for you. You declare a data type, you declare a variable, and the operating system is going to say, hey, here's an address you can use. You're not going to be able to say, hey, I want to use this specific address. The other thing here is we're going to have a integer pointer. Once again, we're calling it PTR. We can call it anything we want. Data type is integer pointer. Notice the star. And the address of that is 33. Okay, so that's the first. When we look at that first sentence of the question, it's helpful to draw it out. We can see that this is how we're originally set up. Okay. And then we're going to answer a few questions saying, hey, what do we get when we do the following things? Okay. So let's look at this and let's say, okay, the first part A says if we print the value of count, what do we get? Right, well, that's pretty straightforward, right? We look at that, the value of count is just this, right? So the answer is going to be 7. B, what does it say? B is saying, what's the address of count? Notice the ampersand. Okay, so notice that ampersand. Okay, it's asking us, what is the value? What do we get what is the address of count? What is the address of count? And in that example, we look at our drawing below, the address is obviously 66. Okay. Now C is a little bit of a more confusing one. So we notice there's the dereference operator. Notice we have the star here. Okay. And that is telling us that what is the dereference operator is saying what is the value that a pointer points to. Well, this is actually an error, right? And the reason for that, the reason that this is an error is because we have a data type issue. Okay? Count, that variable is an integer. It's not an integer pointer. You cannot dereference an integer. You can dereference a pointer, you cannot dereference an integer. All right, so that's going to result in an error. Okay. Now, the last part here, it's a little bit hard to read the moment I drew over some of it. Let me just draw it on the side. It says, assume we have this situation, that line was run. Okay? If that happens, we're going to have the following occur. Okay? Where the value of the pointer is pointing to that address. Okay? So now, if we dereference pointer, what that's going to give us, okay, what that's going to give us is we are going to follow that line. Okay? We're going to follow that line. We're going to follow the address that's contained in the pointer variable, and we're going to grab the value here, which is 7. Okay, so the result of this part, the result of this part for D, the answer to that is 7. Okay? All right. That's the fundamentals of pointers. If you understand that, you've come a long way. Because you understand everything we covered, just to kind of summarize it, is we've looked at the general concept of what a pointer is. We looked at some of the syntax for it, including not only declaring pointers, dereferencing them, okay, being able to go to the location of where a pointer points to, as well as the reference operator saying, hey, give me the address of a particular variable. All right, and we looked at some examples of using those different operators. Okay? Understanding that first is key, because if you've got that point down, if you've got those concepts down, you're now ready to move on to the next step where we can look at how we actually use this very powerful concept to solve some real problems. Okay? All right. I encourage you, rewatch the video, pause it, go back, listen to it multiple times. Make sure you really get this down. It's very hard to move on in other concepts if you're confused on some of these fundamentals here. Okay? And then feel free to ask questions. Post questions, send messages. All right, we'll be glad to help you out. All right, well, thanks for watching.